John Williams is a name that not everyone may instantly recognize. Williams is an American music composer who began his musical career in 1952, when he first arranged music for the US Air Force during his military service. Years later, he worked as a jazz pianist, studio musician, and subsequently went on to compose music for television and film. At some point in our lives, we are bound to have heard at least one of his musical compositions. Take this for instance. Do you recognize this piece? Or how about this? Do you recall this music from anywhere? If they do sound familiar, you might have heard them in blockbuster films which were released during the New Hollywood film movement, or sequels to those films which were spawned due to its success. I believe that John Williams is part of that film movement and played a significant role in reviving the sci-fi and fantasy genres in Hollywood cinema. New Hollywood was an American film movement which took place between the late 1960s to the early 1980s. During the 1950s to the mid-1960s, the success of commercial films was deteriorating due to people turning to other forms of entertainment such as television. Almost all of the Golden Age Hollywood directors were deceased or in retirement by 1975. At that time, the next generation of young film directors were mostly graduates from film school, as opposed to people who climbed up the ranks of the studio system. Such directors included Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, each having their own remarkable style. How is John Williams related to them? Well, those two directors were responsible for shaping the look of the Hollywood blockbuster, while Williams was responsible for shaping the sound. He played a huge part in the success of those two directors' films by composing impactful music for them. One of Williams' most well-known works is arguably his involvement with the Star Wars franchise. In collaboration with George Lucas, he set out to create a grand musical score in order to communicate Lucas's vision and revive the declining sci-fi space opera genre with his own unique musical language. Before Star Wars came out, films around that time in the 1970s only featured pop songs or had very little music at all, making the audience's auditory experience in the cinema less engaging. Williams defied conventional norms in his score by creating music that is distinctly memorable. We are going to take a look at the musical techniques which Williams employed in order to rekindle the audience's interest in sci-fi fantasy films. Williams chose to use traditional orchestral music in favor of futuristic sounding music while composing for the original Star Wars. This was to allow the audience to feel a sense of familiarity in an otherwise unknown and unexplored world, making it seem more believable. Williams also justifies this with the opening crawl which reads, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away," implying that the film takes place in the distant past. Therefore, it was appropriate for him to write and compose music in the style of the late 19th to the early 20th centuries. This fresh juxtaposition made audiences connect better with the film. For example, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Williams made use of traditional string and brass instruments when the aliens first come face to face with the humans, making audiences feel intimate and giving the impression that the aliens are friendly and human-like creatures through music that is earthbound. Williams continued this tradition in his future films and even does so till this day. He also influenced other composers to begin using symphonic scores in their films in the late 70s through the 80s. Another distinctive trait of Williams is his use of musical leitmotifs in his films. A leitmotif can be described as a well-defined recurring melody within a theme which is used to symbolize an idea or person and can be easily identifiable, even if its overall musical structure is altered in future appearances. In other words, you could call a leitmotif a smaller, intricate fragment of a theme song for a character, place, or general idea. Let's take a look at one of the greatest leitmotifs that Williams has ever created. In the original Star Wars, a specific melody could be heard when the protagonist of the film, Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill, was gazing at the sunset in Act 1. With no dialogue in the scene, the emotionally climactic music powerfully conveys Luke's hopes and dreams to the audience. That he's just a person who wants to get off his home planet and figure out his destiny, creating a sense of scale. Near the end of the film, Williams reuses the same leitmotif when Luke was about to receive a medal for blowing up the Death Star. Here, the music sounds more triumphant and heroic, giving the audience a sense of catharsis for Luke's victory. As a result, the audience is able to make the connection that this leitmotif is associated with Luke. Some might call it Luke's theme, others generalize it as the Force theme, interpreting Luke as the symbol of the Force. Williams continued to use this leitmotif in future Star Wars films, establishing musical continuity. This leitmotif could be heard again in the presence of a sunset during Luke's birth in Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith. And Luke's death in Star Wars: The Last Jedi, representing his life having finally gone full circle. I feel that this adds an extra poetic layer to the narrative of the films, which may not be that straightforward to the audience, but they can still subconsciously understand this metaphor. Williams' use of leitmotifs in his films makes his music unforgettable to the point where the audience is actually able to hum at least one tune by the end of the film. One more thing which Williams is fond of doing in his films is using music to heighten the audience's expectations and emotions. In The Empire Strikes Back, Williams composed the Imperial March, serving as Darth Vader's theme. This militaristic leitmotif plays when the audience is first introduced to him and his Imperial forces, setting him up as a menacing and formidable figure, and has stuck with the audience ever since. Williams even foreshadowed the young Anakin's dark fate in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Just by changing all the chords in his theme to minor, the results are the chords to the Imperial March.
This is the Imperial March chords.
Again, this gives scenes a whole nother meaning and creates a feeling of nostalgia, as audiences have heard the theme before, just in a different form. Williams also manipulates the audience's emotions through the use of musical onomatopoeia, which is when the music sounds as if it is describing what is happening in the scene. An example would be in Star Wars. During the scene where Luke receives a holographic message from Leia, the strings and winds make it sound as if the hologram is glistening. During Luke and Vader's fight in Return of the Jedi, the fluctuating strings create a windy soundscape. Music can also be used as an emotional layer. Notably, in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, during the iconic bike chase scene, Williams made the music sound optimistic and uplifting once the bike started to fly, putting emphasis on the wonder of the children as they saw and finally managed to escape, relieving the audience's tension. Without his music, the scene would have been off-putting and laughable.
Yeah! Oh! Ah! Oh my god!
That being said, I believe that John Williams is a true auteur. He reinstated the public's interest in sci-fi fantasy films in the late 1970s and enhanced the audience's viewing experience through his signature music style. Furthermore, he also brought new meaning to scenes which wouldn't have the same emotional impact if it weren't for his score. Although his music has adapted to the fast-paced editing in recent times by using shorter melodies, his use of leitmotifs remains the same. He is still considered to be one of the most renowned composers to help shape Hollywood film music as it is known today.